the great joy of our Father Almighty. I welcome you once again. I have, as usual, a few sections from Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. Particularly, I wanted to discuss the idea of conforming to the world that you live in. And looking carefully at the real meaning of various spiritual instructions we must all have heard many times. The conversation began with my question: can war be stopped? And G answered, yes, it can. But the whole thing is how, he said. It is necessary to know a great deal in order to understand that. What is war? It is the result of planetary influences. Somewhere up there, 2 or 3 planets have approached too near each other. Tension results. Have you noticed how, if a man passes quite close to you on a narrow pavement, you become tense? That same tension takes place between planets. For them it lasts perhaps a second or 2. But here on the earth people begin to slaughter one another, and they go on slaughtering for several years. It seems to them at the time that they hate one another, or perhaps that they have to slaughter each other for some exalted purpose, or that they must defend somebody or something, and that it is a very noble thing to do, or something else of that kind. They fail to realize to what an extent they are mere pawns in the game. They think they signify something. They think they can move about as they like. They think they can decide to do this or that. But in reality, all their movements, all their actions are the result of planetary influences, and they themselves signify literally nothing. This was all I heard. Only much later I understood that he wished to tell me that how accidental influences could be diverted or transformed into something relatively harmless. It was really an interesting idea, referring to the esoteric meaning of sacrifices. What was really important, and what he said quite casually, so that I did not even notice at once, and only remembered later in trying to reconstruct the conversation, was his words referring to the difference of time for planets and for man. And even when I remembered it for a long time, I did not realize the full meaning of this idea. Later very much was based upon it. From the point of view of the planets, we must really look like microscopic specks, and events that happen at their scale have a deafening effect across us. And although for them it might be just a small event, for us it would last several years. And all this would not really matter, apart from the fact that humanity seems to be a 3-brained being, and so at a stretch he has access to what is called objective reason, so he can actually see. He is small, but there is a possibility for him to actually understand objectively and to participate, and to not just be a pawn. But this is an opportunity that is taken up very rarely. Historically, and things that I like to talk about, when Britain was ruled by a king, and the influence of the king stretched from one side of the country to the other, like a star travelling to the border. And then the country could coordinate and to do a thing together, and to mean a thing together. it could produce a unified energy that could change things. But it's different today, of course. People are excited about the idea of being an individual, which is an illusion. I was listening to the news this morning and somebody was relaying what President Trump had said last week. And the reporter was saying, Trump had said this, Trump had said that. I could see that this man was identifying with the president. By repeating his words, he was almost becoming the president. You can become somebody famous, you can be opposed to somebody famous. Most of the world is orientated in this way. Their lives are based upon identifying with people that they see outside themselves. What Gurdjieff calls identification. The situation is quite complicated, but if I can say that every man has to plough a field. It may be possible to plough a field by seeing it outside of yourself. Yes, it might be. The spiritual part, of course, is about seeing things inside of yourself. And further than that, to move from this field into a higher field. In other words, to work in the world for a certain period of time until you have gained enough strength and enough solidity inside of yourself, and then to move beyond this world so that you may enter a higher one. Something that came up last week I wanted to discuss was the sequence of the loss of spiritual knowledge. And what I had said last week is that I do a lot of very technical spiritual exercises from the Chinese tradition, also from the Catholic tradition, as I'm sure I've mentioned. And after many years I have realized that it's actually very difficult to do any of these exercises because it involves triggering aspects of your subtle body. Prayer means you need to invoke your emotional body to resonate in a certain way. You can't just mouth the words. Those words, the lines that you say, have to be joined by a particular shining coming from the emotions that changes along the course of the prayer. But it is possible to recover all these things because the first thing to be lost is the reconciling, and what remains after that is the words and the body movements. And they are often stored quite well, even after centuries, and they can be restored. So the first step is the loss of the reconciling, meaning that the feeling that joins it all together, and of course, even before that, the sense of the whole, of the momentum of the whole is lost. Then the reconciling falls away and you're left with the poles, the words and the physical movements. Let's hear from Ouspensky now. I think it is an almost childish question, but I can never see how things cannot be different. One does something and one cannot help thinking that one could do it differently. But if you behaved in a certain way, it means that you could not behave in another way. If you could, you would have behaved differently. We are so accustomed to think that things could be different that we could not try to change the things we could change. We can change today, but yesterday is finished. If we change today, tomorrow things can happen differently. It looks like a contradiction, but it is precisely our belief that things can be different that prevents us from doing what we can to make them different. One does not come to this understanding just like that. It comes after some time of working on oneself, so that when one comes to this realization, one has many other realizations besides, chiefly that there are ways to change if one applies the right instrument at the right place and at the right time. One must have these instruments, and these again are only given by work. It is very important to come to this realization. Without it, one will not do the right things, one will excuse oneself. So why does Ouspensky talk like this all the time? One cannot do. What does that mean, one cannot do? It means something like you're caught in patterns, your whole life is patterns and you just don't even see it. And that if you want to do something new, if you want to change, that's very good, but instead of looking at something new, something to be bolted on, some higher place to add on to yourself, something else needs to change to loosen the rigidity of your current patterns. It is where you are now that needs to be softened and inspected and opened up so you could be more free here. But of course these ideas are more than skin deep for Gurdjieff and Ouspensky. In recent years, some of my neighbours have built an absolute monstrosity next to my property that I absolutely hate, and every day I wake up in the morning and think, what can I do about it? Shall I go to war in the courts? But it seems to me, and for various technical reasons, I'll just end up losing a lot more. And so I have to grin and bear it, and I don't like it at all. And every day I have the same confrontation inside of myself. But seeking some counsel from the I Ching, the message is always the same. You, my friend, the I Ching says, you are a stranger in a strange land, and you're starting to piss people off, and they take their revenge on you. And it doesn't really matter that I don't like it, because there's not a damn thing I can do about it. And it's simply an ugly fact of my life that I just can't do anything about right now. And I don't really have any British blood, and although I probably know much more about the country than most people, the British have a certain way, and maybe if I help, then certain opportunities would arise, Maybe if they saw that I was really contributing to the team, then their third or fourth youngest daughter would be offered to me for marriage, metaphorically. That's the kind of language the I Ching uses. But it is a principle of the path that you must come out of your unconsciousness and ground yourself, anchor yourself in the real world where you are. You cannot go to a higher world unless you can go to this world. That's the principle, and that's where most people make their mistake. Most people are not in this world. They are neither in their body, they don't feel their body properly, they don't use their body in any kind of inspired or soulful way. The whole thing is just a machine, a mechanical dream. And in their dream, they're always thinking about going somewhere better. If you can enter this world, then you can choose to conform to the environment, which means that you complete the cycles that are around you. You help people with their work, you complete your own work, you assist everything around you to become complete circles, rather than the broken mess of random, unfinished business that passes for life around us. The religious idea of Seva, of giving service, this is really what it means, in my opinion. It means to assist the conformity of everything around you to complete cycles, because what creates energy is the completion of cycles or of octaves. What are you serving to who, and for what reason does somebody want you to beg? The service, it is about repairing the web of energetic connections, allowing the energy to travel through by making sure the octaves don't break. The maintenance of the existing world can be considered the first part of the journey. May I ask this question, sir? There is one thing which has preoccupied me for a long time. How should a man act towards a woman so as to be her master and make her happy, to be really master of the situation? What is necessary to do? That is your question. First of all, you must be a man inside yourself. The man must be a man. Your question is very original and characteristic for everybody. A man can demand everything of his wife, but he can only demand if he is, in truth, a man. If he is a man of the middle sex, it is impossible. This, by the way, exists in all languages. Two kinds of prostitutes. Prostitutes in skirts and prostitutes in trousers. In trousers it is neither man nor woman, middle sex, whether it be his mother, his sister, his wife. She will act as she is told to. Women do not depend upon herself. If you are not a man, then you are a prostitute, and you suggest to her that which she is. You are half a man. Well, I think the whole modern world would do well to take notice of what Gurdjieff has just said. I happened to see this beautiful vintage poster from Imperial Airways from, I think, the 1930s. And I think these were on the flying boats of the time. What I immediately noticed is the lady by the window with the red cardigan and the purse in her right hand. I noticed immediately her posture. I recognized it. Her body is concave, the purse is down by the side. She wants to be approached and is demure. I simply recognize that I've seen this posture countless times. And the tall man in front of her has a different posture that, personally, having been raised in a left-wing period, I don't really recognize this posture, but maybe you'd see it in country-dwelling people still in England. Of course, a poster is not real life, and no doubt the artist is characterizing them in a very recognizable way. Nevertheless, it seems to me that you could learn a lot from this. As I've mentioned, in trying to comprehend how Western civilization could recover itself, I've read so many books from the last few hundred years, full of historians and philosophers who were worried about the decline and what needed to be done, and they struggled mightily, they offered solutions, and it's been going on for several hundred years, and that includes the New Age movement of the 20th century. What's the result? Failure. Why? Why didn't they find a way out? Well, as I've mentioned, I'm embarking on reupholstering a set of dining room chairs, and after getting in touch with 20 foam suppliers, I've decided that it's just not possible to do that, and I've got the material downstairs now, which includes a thick felt that I will lay underneath the existing foam. And I finally got some black cotton duck 460 GSM that I'll replace the fabric with. That's my conclusion. But it was a hell of a struggle to learn about these things on your own without any training, and it's much easier not to. It's much easier to write a book or talk or to teach, isn't it? They treat their lives the holiday, they enjoy it, but as their identities are so confused and so fragmented and so lived through other people, whether they really expect anything good to happen to them after death is difficult to say. I heard some wonderful Scottish pipers this week, and I thought I would read out an old Celtic tale. The Doomed Rider. Tim Connan is as bonny a river as we have in all the North Country. There's many a sweet sunny spot on its banks, and many a time and oft have I waded through its shallows when a boy, to set my little scouting line for the trouts and the eels, or to gather the big pearl mussels that lie sae thick in the fords. But its bonny wooded banks are places for enjoying the day in, not for passing the night. I can know how it is. It's not one of your old wild streams that wander desolate through a desert country, like the Avon, or that come rushing down in foam and thunder over broken rocks like the Foyers, or that wallow in darkness deep, deep in the bowels of the earth, like the fearful old grunt. And yet, not one of these rivers has more or frightfuler stories connected with it than the Conan. And you can hardly saunter over half a mile in its course, from where it leaves Contin till where it enters the sea, without passing over the scene of some frightful old legend. And any of the most frightful looking of these places is to be found among the woods of Conan House. There enter a swampy meadow that waves with flags and rushes, like a cornfield in harvest, and see a hillock covered with willows rising like an island in the midst. There are thick mirk woods on either side. The river, dark and awesome and whirling round and round in mossy eddies, sweeps away behind it, and there is an old burying ground with the broken ruins of an old papist kirk on the tap. And you can see among the rougher stones the rose-wort millions of an arched window, and the trough that once held the holy water, and 200 years ago a wee more may be or a wee less, for any cannot be sure of the date of those old stories. The building was entire, and a spot near it where the wood now grows the thickest was laid out in a cornfield. The marks of the furrows may still be seen among the trees. And a party of Highlanders were busily engaged, a day in the harvest, in cutting down the corn of that field, and just about noon, when the sun shone brightest, and they were busiest in the work, they heard a voice from the river exclaim, "The hour but not the man has come." Sure enough, on looking round, there was the Kelpie standing in what they call a false ford, just formed the old kirk. There is a deep black pool bathing about below, but in the ford there's a bonny ripple that shows, as one might think, but little depth of water, and just in the middle of that, in a place where a horse might swim, stood the Kelpie, and it again repeated its words, "The hour but not the man has come." And then, flashing through the water like a drake, it disappeared in the lower pool. When the folk stood wondering what the creature might mean, they saw a man on horseback come spurring down the hill in hot haste, making straight for the false ford. They could then understand her words at once, and 4 of the stoutest of them sprang out from among the corn to warn him of his danger, and keep him back. And so they told him what they had seen and heard, and urged him either to turn back and take another road and stay for an hour or say where he was. But he just wouldn't hear them, for he was both unbelieving and in haste, and would have taken the ford for a they could say, had not the Highlanders, determined on saving him whether he would or no, gathered round him and pulled him from his horse, and then, to make sure of him, locked him up in the old kirk. Well, when the hour had gone by, the fatal hour of the Kelpie, they flung open the door and cried to him that he might not go on his journey. Ah, but there was no answer though. And say they cried a second time, and there was no answer still, and then they went in and found him lying stiff and cold on the floor, with his face buried in the water of the very stone trough that we may still see among the ruins. His hour had come, and he had fallen in a fit, as 'twould seem, head foremost among the water of the trough, where he had been smothered. And say ye see, the prophecy of the Kelpie availed nothing.